Welcome to our last history snippet of 2022. I'm Sarah, I'm the curator here at Edwards Place in Springfield, Illinois, and today we are going to talk about one of the workmen for the Edwards family, Henry Freigh. I have no idea at this time when Henry was born, if he was an immigrant, if he had a family. The only things that I know about Henry are from Helen Edwards' letters. I should say, there was one mention in the Daily Illinois State Journal that could have possibly been our Henry Freigh, but it was spelled differently, in which he was listed as needing to pick up his mail from the post office. Helen Edwards began talking about Henry Freigh in her letters to her daughter Helen starting in 1867. Henry had the difficult task of helping the Edwards family pack Helen's belongings for her move to Kansas. You see, the younger Helen married a Moses Condell, and they ended up moving out to Kansas during the early years of their marriage. And in 1867, Helen wrote to her daughter about all the different things that they were trying to send her. Helen and Henry actually went back and forth about what they think that Helen the younger would need when she was out there. I was busy as I could be all yesterday morning in examining among the rubbish to find that which I thought might be useful to you, though I think myself Henry put in a few things which you will not care to see in your new home. I sent many articles I thought you would find useful, which Henry said you did not want. One of the largest pieces to go was a stove. It seemed cracked, and had he noticed it earlier would have mentioned it, but thinks it may be past using after its long journey, and your father regrets now that this one had not been left here, and that he did not tell Mose to buy the best one he could at Topeka. Mrs. Edwards was torn up about this because not only of the expense of sending a stove, but also because it was incredibly heavy. Stoves could be more than 400 pounds. One thing I did notice that even when Helen and Henry disagreed on what they should be sending, I really never found Helen saying a negative word about Henry. And if you've seen other episodes in this season, you know that this is really curious for Helen. Possibly it's because he was just hired for this one specific job, but another reason was that he was probably doing a job that she knew she wouldn't be able to complete without him. With the other servants, they were doing domestic labor that Helen knew how to do. When she first came to Springfield, she was doing all of those tasks on her own. So she was particularly judgy about the way things were done because she remembered doing it herself. Not 1 month after Henry helped move all of the younger Helen's belongings, he suffered from inflammation of the bowels. That is probably a likely case of salmonella poisoning or E. coli, but it also could have been something that he had as a chronic illness like ulcerative colitis or even Crohn's disease. Both of those conditions were not named at that time, so they wouldn't have had any language to talk about those. And I tend to think it was the former just because of the sudden onset and deterioration that Henry went through on a really quick schedule. And Helen was clearly devastated about him. She went to visit him, and she didn't have very good news to relay. I am a little afraid his end is near at hand. I feel really troubled about his condition. That night, Henry Freigh passed away. Mrs. Edwards didn't hear of it until the next afternoon. Her grandson and the younger Helen's son, Tom, heard her and Mr. Edwards talking about what happened to Mr. Freigh. Tom suddenly looked up and said, "Is Henry dead?" "Yes." "Will they bury him in the graveyard?" Before being answered, he said with a trembling voice, "I feel like crying." His grandfather said gently, "Well, never mind." "But I do," and with that burst into tears. I had to cry too. After a while said, "But I did like Henry so much. He packed up everything for Papa and Mama to go to Kansas. So nice, and I am so sorry he is dead." Helen was moved by the sensibility shown by her grandson, and she said, "I do not think it ought to be repressed. It shows kindly, tender feeling, and I earnestly hope he will ever retain it." It's my hope that we'll be able to find more about this hard-working man who was clearly missed by many. We may not know much about Henry, but at least these little tidbits of information show us what kind of man he was. I hope that you've enjoyed this season of History Snippets. It's been really fun to do research on these people in Lincoln, Springfield, and I hope to bring you more interesting stories in 2023. Thanks.